Ma'am, this is a restricted military facility, not a food court. The guard's voice dripped with condescension as Maya Rodriguez stood at the Fort Braxton checkpoint, holding nothing but a thermal delivery bag and her driver's license. They saw a tired woman in a faded uniform shirt, sneakers worn thin from countless deliveries, someone who clearly didn't belong among the crisp fatigues and polished boots surrounding her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What they didn't see was the set of coordinates carved deep into her shoulder blade, numbers that marked the exact location where she'd saved 37 lives with nothing but wire cutters and a prayer. The security team snickered when she insisted she had clearance for the delivery. They rolled their eyes when she mentioned the order number. But when Major David Chen stepped out of the administrative building and caught sight of those familiar digits etched into her skin, everything changed. What happened next would remind an entire base that heroes don't always wear the uniform you expect them to. The North Carolina sun beat down mercilessly on the asphalt outside Fort Braxton's main entrance, creating waves of heat that shimmered like mirages above the concrete barriers. Maya Rodriguez pulled her beat-up Honda Civic into the visitor parking area, the engine making that familiar rattling sound that meant another expensive repair was probably just around the corner. She grabbed the insulated delivery bag from the passenger seat, checking the order slip one more time to make sure she had everything right. 3 club sandwiches, 2 Caesar salads, and a large sweet tea for Captain Mitchell's staff meeting. Simple enough, except nothing was ever simple when it came to military bases. The main gate stood like a fortress of bureaucracy, all steel and bulletproof glass, with warning signs posted in multiple languages about authorized personnel only. Maya had been delivering food for Hometown Eats for almost 2 years now, but military bases still made her stomach twist into knots. Too many memories, too many ghosts that she'd worked hard to bury. She pulled down the sleeves of her delivery uniform, a faded burgundy polo shirt with the company logo stitched above the pocket, making sure the fabric covered the scarred skin of her upper arms. Lady, do you have any idea how many scammers try to get onto this base every week? People claiming they're delivering food, fixing computers, reading meters. You think we were born yesterday? Maya felt her jaw tighten, but she forced herself to stay calm. Getting angry never helped anything, and these guards were just doing their job, even if they were doing it with unnecessary attitude. I understand your security concerns, but I'm just trying to deliver lunch. The food's gonna get cold if we don't resolve this soon. Morrison stepped closer to the window, his bulk casting a shadow over the paperwork. Ma'am, this is a restricted military facility, not a food court. We can't just let every random person with a delivery bag waltz through our gates because they claim somebody ordered a sandwich. Random person? Maya repeated, feeling something cold settle in her chest. I'm a licensed delivery driver with a clean background check and valid identification. I'm not asking for a tour of your classified facilities. I just need to deliver food to the building that ordered it. Blake looked Maya up and down with obvious disdain, taking in the worn sneakers, the faded polo shirt, the tired lines around her eyes that came from working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. You don't exactly look like someone who belongs on a military base. Are you sure you're at the right place? Maybe you meant to go to the community college down the road. The comment hit Maya like a physical blow, not because it was particularly cruel, but because of how casually it was delivered. The assumption that she was lost, confused, too simple to understand where she was or what she was doing. She'd heard variations of the same dismissal countless times over the past few years. At the grocery store when she paid with food stamps. At the auto repair shop when she tried to negotiate a payment plan. At job interviews where potential employers saw her address and made immediate assumptions about her character. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, Maya said quietly. I have a legitimate delivery for Captain Mitchell's office. The order number is in your system if you take the time to actually look for it, instead of assuming I'm some kind of threat. Jake was enjoying himself now, encouraged by his colleagues' attitudes and feeling like he was part of something important. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of game you're trying to play here, but we're not buying it. Military personnel don't order food from random delivery services. They eat in the chow hall like everyone else." "That's not true, and you know it," Maya replied, her patience finally starting to fray. "Officers order catering for meetings and special events all the time. It's completely normal and completely legal." Morrison held up a hand like he was directing traffic. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your little bag of sandwiches and get back in your car. Then you're going to drive off this property and not come back unless you have proper authorization, which you clearly don't have." Maya stared at the three guards, seeing something she recognized from another lifetime. The certainty that they were right. The absolute conviction that they held all the power in this situation. The casual cruelty that came from never having been on the receiving end of it themselves. She thought about the food getting cold in the delivery bag, about the tip she wouldn't earn if she couldn't complete the delivery, about having to explain to her boss why she'd failed at such a simple task. But more than that, she thought about the men and women inside that base who were depending on her to do her job, just like she'd once depended on others to do theirs. People who were working hard and deserved to have their lunch delivered on time, regardless of what three guards with inflated egos thought about her appearance or her credentials. "I'm not leaving until I deliver this food," Maya said, her voice gaining strength. "You can check your records again. You can call Captain Mitchell's office directly, or you can get a supervisor who actually knows how to do their job. But I'm not driving away because you three decided I don't look military enough for your standards." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Maya immediately knew she'd crossed a line. Morrison's face darkened, Blake's grip tightened on her clipboard, and Jake stepped forward like he was preparing for a confrontation. The checkpoint suddenly felt very small, and Maya was acutely aware that she was surrounded by armed guards who clearly didn't appreciate being questioned by a civilian. "Ma'am," Morrison said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "you need to adjust your attitude real quick. We're the authority here, not you. If we say you don't belong on this base, then you don't belong on this base. End of discussion." Maya looked around at the faces surrounding her, seeing the same expression she'd encountered so many times over the past few years. The look that said she was nothing, that her words didn't matter, that she should be grateful they were even talking to her instead of just calling security. It was a look that reduced her to her current circumstances and refused to see anything beyond them. For a moment, she considered backing down. It would be easier to apologize, to promise she'd made an honest mistake, to drive away and let someone else deal with the consequences. But something inside her rebelled against the idea of giving these guards the satisfaction of watching her retreat. She'd spent too many years being pushed around by people who thought they knew better, and she was tired of apologizing for taking up space in the world. Instead, Maya straightened her shoulders and met Morrison's glare with steady eyes. "Then call your supervisor," she said calmly, "because I'm not leaving." The checkpoint fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning units and the distant sound of vehicles moving through the base. Maya could feel sweat trickling down her back, but she didn't move, didn't look away, didn't give any sign that she was intimidated by their display of authority. She'd faced down much worse than three guards with bad attitudes, even if they didn't know it yet. Blake was the first to break the silence, her voice sharp with irritation. "You're making a big mistake, lady. We don't take kindly to civilians who come onto our property and start making demands. Maybe you think this is some kind of customer service situation, but you're wrong. I think this is a situation where I'm trying to do my job and you're preventing me from doing it," Maya replied. "I don't want to cause trouble for anyone. I just want to deliver this food and move on with my day." Morrison shook his head slowly, like he was dealing with a particularly stubborn child. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about your job or your delivery. This is about respect. Respect for authority, respect for protocol, respect for the fact that we're the ones wearing the uniform here." The irony of his words wasn't lost on Maya, but she kept her expression neutral. These guards had no idea who they were talking to, no concept of what respect actually meant. no understanding that the woman standing in front of them had earned the right to wear a uniform long before any of them had even considered military service. But explaining that would require rolling up her sleeves, and she wasn't ready for that conversation yet. "I respect the job you're doing," Maya said carefully. "I understand that security is important, but I also know that I have a legitimate reason to be here, and I'm not going to be bullied into leaving because you don't want to take 5 minutes to verify my credentials." Jake laughed again, but this time there was an edge to it that suggested his patience was running thin. "Bullied? Lady, you haven't seen anything yet. You want to keep pushing this, we can escalate it real quick. We can have actual security officers down here who don't mind getting physical with people who refuse to follow directions." The threat was clear, and Maya felt her heart rate spike despite her efforts to stay calm. She'd been in enough confrontations to recognize when a situation was about to turn ugly, and she could see the excitement in Jake's eyes that suggested he was hoping for exactly that outcome. Some people got a rush from exerting power over others, especially when they felt that power was justified by their position or authority. But Maya had also learned that backing down from bullies only encouraged them to push harder the next time. If she left now, these guards would remember her as the delivery driver who talked big but folded under pressure. The next time someone in her position showed up at their checkpoint, they'd be even more aggressive, even more dismissive, even more convinced of their own importance. "Make your calls," Maya said quietly. "But I'm not leaving until someone with actual authority tells me I have to." The standoff stretched on, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Maya could see other personnel moving around in the background, going about their daily routines while completely unaware of the drama playing out at the main gate. She wondered how many similar scenes had played out in this exact spot, how many people had been turned away by guards who were more interested in flexing their authority than actually doing their jobs. Morrison finally reached for his radio, his movements deliberate and theatrical. "Control, this is main gate. We've got a situation here with a civilian who's refusing to comply with security protocols, requesting supervisor response." The radio crackled with static before a voice responded. "Copy that, main gate. What's the nature of the situation?" "Civilian claims to have a delivery authorization that doesn't exist in our system. She's refusing to leave the premises when directed." There was a pause before the voice came back. "Are we talking about a code yellow situation here?" Morrison looked at Maya with what might have been disappointment that she wasn't providing enough drama to justify a more serious response. "Negative on code yellow. Just a stubborn civilian who doesn't understand the concept of military authority." "Understood. Supervisor will be there in 5 minutes." Morrison clipped the radio back to his belt and crossed his arms again. "There you go. You'll get your supervisor. But when they tell you the same thing we've been telling you, I don't want to hear any more complaints about how unfairly you're being treated." Maya nodded, settling in to wait. She'd gotten what she asked for, but she also knew that supervisors weren't always more reasonable than the people they supervised. Sometimes they were worse, more invested in backing up their subordinates than in actually solving problems. But at least she'd have the satisfaction of knowing she'd stood her ground, regardless of how this situation ultimately played out.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The next 5 minutes passed slowly, with the 3 guards making occasional comments clearly designed to make Maya uncomfortable. Blake wondered aloud whether civilian authorities should be called to remove trespassers. Jake speculated about what kind of person showed up at a military base without proper authorization. Morrison just stared at Maya like he was trying to intimidate her through sheer force of will. Maya ignored them all, focusing instead on the weight of the delivery bag in her hands and the knowledge that somewhere inside that base, people were waiting for their lunch. It was a small thing, maybe insignificant in the grand scheme of military operations, but it mattered to her. She'd taken pride in her work, even when the work itself wasn't particularly glamorous, and she wasn't about to let 3 guards with attitude problems undermine that pride. When the supervisor finally appeared, Maya felt a flutter of hope that quickly died when she saw his expression. He was older than the other guards, probably in his 40s, with the kind of weathered face that suggested years of outdoor work and very little patience for complications. His name tag read Torres, and he approached the checkpoint with the weary air of someone who dealt with too many similar situations. "What seems to be the problem here?" Torres asked, directing his question to Morrison rather than Maya. "Civilian showed up claiming she has authorization for a food delivery," Morrison explained. "No record of it in our system, no proper documentation, but she is refusing to leave when directed." Torres looked at Maya for the first time, his expression neutral but not particularly friendly. "Ma'am, is that an accurate description of the situation?" Maya held out the order slip and her identification. "I have a confirmed delivery for Captain Mitchell's office. The order was placed this morning, through your official catering system. I've provided all the documentation I have, but these guards won't take the time to verify it properly." Torres glanced at the paperwork but didn't really examine it. "Ma'am, our security protocols are in place for a reason. If there's no record of your delivery in our system, then we can't allow you onto the base. It's that simple." "Can you call Captain Mitchell's office directly to confirm?" Maya asked. "The order number should be in their system even if it's not showing up in yours." "Ma'am, we don't make phone calls to verify every civilian who shows up claiming they have business on this base. That's not how security works." Maya felt her frustration building again, but she forced herself to stay calm. "So what you're telling me is that if there's any kind of communication breakdown between your systems, legitimate deliveries just can't happen. That doesn't seem like a very efficient way to run things." Torres's expression hardened slightly. "Ma'am, I'm not here to discuss the efficiency of our security protocols with you. I'm here to resolve a situation where a civilian is refusing to follow lawful directions from military personnel." The word lawful hit Maya like a slap, carrying with it all the weight of official authority and the suggestion that she was somehow operating outside the bounds of acceptable behavior. It was a word designed to end arguments, to make clear who held the power in this situation and who was expected to submit to that power without question. But Maya had heard that word used as a weapon before, had seen how quickly lawful could become a shield for people who wanted to abuse their authority without consequences. She'd also learned that sometimes the most lawful thing you could do was refuse to accept an unlawful exercise of power, even when that refusal came with costs. "I'm not breaking any laws by standing here with a legitimate delivery," Maya said quietly. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm not trying to access restricted areas, and I'm not refusing to follow reasonable security protocols. I'm asking you to do your job by verifying my credentials instead of just assuming they're invalid." Torres stared at her for a long moment, and Maya could see him weighing his options. He could continue the confrontation, potentially escalating it to a point where security would have to physically remove her from the property. He could make the phone call she'd requested, and risk finding out that she was right and his guards were wrong. Or he could find some middle ground that allowed everyone to save face while resolving the immediate problem. "Ma'am," he said finally, "I'm going to give you one more opportunity to leave this property voluntarily. If you choose not to take that opportunity, I'll have to call actual security to escort you off the premises. And if that happens, you'll be banned from returning to this base for any reason." The ultimatum hung in the air between them, final and absolute. Maya realized that she'd reached the point where she had to make a choice that would have consequences regardless of which direction she went. She could leave now and preserve her ability to deliver to the base in the future, but she'd also be confirming to these guards that they could dismiss anyone they didn't think belonged without bothering to verify their credentials. Or she could stand her ground and risk losing not just this delivery but potentially her job if word got back to her employer that she'd been escorted off a military base by security. It wasn't a choice between right and wrong, so much as a choice between different kinds of consequences different ways of living with herself afterward. Maya looked around at the faces surrounding her one more time, seeing the certainty in their eyes that she would ultimately back down, because people like her always back down when confronted with real authority. They were probably right, and that knowledge made her decision easier than it should have been. "Make your call," she said calmly. "I'll wait." Torres reached for his radio with the deliberate slowness of someone who wanted to make sure Maya understood the gravity of what was about to happen. The crackling static filled the air as he keyed the microphone, and Maya felt her stomach drop as she realized there was no turning back now. She'd pushed the situation past the point of simple resolution, and whatever happened next would determine not just whether she delivered lunch today, but potentially whether she'd be able to work in this area again. "Control, this is Supervisor Torres at main gate. I need a security escort for civilian removal. Non-compliant individual refusing to leave the premises after being directed to do so multiple times." The radio crackled back immediately. "Copy that, Torres. What's the threat level?" "Low threat, but the individual is being uncooperative. Just need bodies to escort her off the property and document the incident." Maya felt the weight of those words settling around her like a net. In a matter of minutes, she'd gone from being a delivery driver trying to do her job to being an uncooperative individual who required security escort. The transformation was swift and absolute, reducing her entire presence here to a problem that needed to be solved through the application of official authority. Blake was practically vibrating with satisfaction, clearly enjoying the drama of the situation. "I told you this would happen," she said to Maya with poorly concealed glee. "You should have listened when we gave you the chance to leave quietly. Now it's going to be a whole thing, and it's all going to be on your record." Jake was bouncing slightly on his feet, energized by the prospect of watching someone get escorted off the property. "Think they'll use the flex cuffs?" he asked Morrison quietly, though not quietly enough to prevent Maya from hearing. "I mean, she's not exactly cooperating, and they probably want to make sure she doesn't cause any more trouble." Morrison shrugged, but Maya could see the anticipation in his eyes. "Depends on how much she fights it. Some people go easy, some people make it difficult. This one seems like the type who might make it difficult." Maya felt a chill run down her spine as she realized how quickly the narrative had shifted. She wasn't a person trying to deliver food anymore. She was a potential troublemaker who might require physical restraint. The guards were already mentally preparing for a confrontation, already assuming she would resist whatever came next. The progression from verbal disagreement to physical removal seemed inevitable now, and Maya wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake by refusing to back down. But even as doubt crept in, she felt something else stirring in her chest. A familiar sensation she hadn't experienced in years. The feeling of being underestimated by people who had no idea what they were dealing with. It was the same feeling she'd had in Afghanistan, when male soldiers assumed she couldn't handle the physical demands of combat engineering, when officers questioned whether she had the technical knowledge to disarm complex explosive devices, when everyone around her seemed convinced that her presence was more liability than asset. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, being dismissed as a troublemaker by people who spent their days playing at military authority, while she'd once spent her days actually living it. The guards saw a woman in a faded delivery uniform who didn't know her place, but they had no idea they were looking at someone who'd earned her place in situations far more dangerous than anything they'd likely ever face. Torres was still coordinating with security when Maya noticed movement in her peripheral vision. A figure was approaching from the direction of the administrative building, walking with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested someone important was taking an interest in the commotion at the main gate. She turned slightly to get a better look and felt her breath catch when she saw the rank insignia on the approaching officer's uniform. Major David Chen was a compact man in his early 50s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in actual combat zones rather than behind a desk. His uniform was crisp but not pristine, showing the subtle signs of someone who cared more about functionality than appearance. He moved with the confident ease of someone who'd earned his authority through experience, rather than just time in service. As he got closer, Maya could see his eyes scanning the scene with the analytical precision of someone trained to rapidly assess situations and identify problems. His gaze moved from the cluster of guards to Maya herself, and she felt something shift in the air around them. Unlike the other personnel she'd encountered, Chen didn't seem to be making immediate assumptions about what he was seeing. "What's the situation here?" Chen asked Torres, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to be loud to be heard. Torres straightened slightly, clearly recognizing that he was now dealing with someone significantly higher in the chain of command. "Sir, we have a civilian who showed up claiming to have delivery authorization that doesn't exist in our system. She's been refusing to leave when directed, so we're bringing in security to escort her off the property." Chen nodded slowly, then turned to look at Maya directly. "And you are?" "Maya Rodriguez," she replied, holding out her delivery documentation. "I'm here to deliver food to Captain Mitchell's office. I have a confirmed order and all the proper paperwork, but these guards won't take the time to verify it in their system." Chen accepted the paperwork and actually examined it, reading through the details with the kind of attention that the other guards hadn't bothered to provide. Maya watched his expression carefully, looking for any sign of what he was thinking, but his face remained neutral and professional. "The order number you have here," Chen said after a moment, "it's formatted correctly for our catering system. The authorization code matches what we use for officer-level requests." He looked up at Torres. "Did you actually run this through the system, or did you just take the guard's word that it wasn't there?" Torres looked uncomfortable for the first time since arriving at the checkpoint. "Sir, the guards check their immediate access logs. If there's no record there, then typically that means the person checking didn't know where to look," Chen interrupted. "The catering system runs on a separate server from the standard security logs. You need to cross-reference with the commissary database to verify food service authorizations." Maya felt a surge of vindication so strong it was almost dizzying. After 30 minutes of being treated like a potential criminal, someone with actual authority was finally doing what she'd been asking for all along, taking 5 minutes to verify her credentials properly. She could see the realization dawning on the guards' faces that they might have made a significant error, and the satisfaction was sweeter than she'd expected. Chen was still examining the paperwork when his eyes stopped on something Maya hadn't noticed before. In the corner of the delivery receipt, partially obscured by a coffee stain, was a small notation that the driver had provided additional identification for security purposes. Maya frowned, trying to remember what that might refer to, when Chen looked up at her with a new expression in his eyes. "The notation here says, 'You provided military identification for verification,'" he said carefully. "Are you prior service?" Maya hesitated, feeling the weight of the question. It had been years since anyone had asked her about her military background, and she'd grown accustomed to being seen only as a civilian delivery driver. The idea of acknowledging that part of her past felt strange, like putting on clothes that no longer fit properly. "Yes, sir," she said finally. 82nd Airborne, Combat Engineer. "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan before my discharge." The atmosphere around the checkpoint shifted immediately. Torres straightened, Blake stopped smirking, and even Jake seemed to realize that the situation had become more complicated than he'd anticipated. Maya could see the guards exchanging glances, suddenly uncertain about how to proceed with someone who might actually understand military protocol better than they did. Chen's expression remained neutral, but Maya caught something in his eyes that suggested he was reassessing everything about the situation. "What was your specialty as a combat engineer?" "Explosive ordnance disposal and route clearance," Maya replied. "I was certified on everything from improvised devices to complex structural demolitions. My team was responsible for clearing supply routes and securing forward operating bases." Morrison stepped forward slightly, his earlier confidence replaced by obvious discomfort. "Sir, she never mentioned any of that when she arrived. She just said she was delivering food." "Because that's what I was doing," Maya said, feeling her patience with Morrison finally reaching its limit. I was delivering food, which is my job now. I didn't think I needed to recite my military resume to drop off sandwiches. Chen held up a hand to prevent further argument. What unit were you with in Afghanistan? 3rd Battalion, 82nd Airborne Division, Maya replied. We were based out of Fob Shank for most of my deployment. Later transferred to Fob Warrior for specialized operations. Maya watched Chen's face carefully as she mentioned the forward operating bases, and she saw something flicker in his expression that suggested those locations meant something to him. It was subtle, just a slight tightening around his eyes. But she'd learned to read micro-expressions during her time in combat zones, where missing such signals could be fatal. Fob Warrior, Chen repeated slowly. What years were you there? 2018 to 2019, Maya said. We were doing route clearance and infrastructure protection during the drawdown operations. Chen was quiet for a long moment, and Maya could see him processing information that the other guards clearly weren't privy to. The checkpoint had grown silent except for the distant sounds of base activity, and Maya felt like everyone was waiting for something significant to happen, though she wasn't sure what. What's your last name again? Chen asked. Rodriguez. Chen nodded slowly. And your first name is Maya? Yes, sir. Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez, 82nd Airborne Division, combat engineer, specializing in explosive ordnance disposal. Maya felt her heart skip. It had been years since anyone had used her military rank, and hearing it spoken aloud by someone who clearly knew something about her service record was both thrilling and terrifying. She wondered what Chen knew, what information he had access to that would prompt such specific questions. Yes, sir, that's correct. Chen looked at her for another long moment, then turned to Torres. Cancel the security escort. This woman is authorized to be here. Torres looked confused. Sir, I don't understand. There's still no record of her delivery authorization in our system. There's no record because you were looking in the wrong system, Chen replied. But more importantly, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez doesn't need delivery authorization to be on this base. She has standing access under Veteran Services protocols. Maya stared at Chen, trying to process what he'd just said. She'd never heard of standing access for veterans, and she certainly hadn't known she was entitled to any special treatment based on her service record. The idea that she could have avoided this entire confrontation by simply mentioning her military background was both relieving and infuriating. Blake was the first to break the silence, her voice smaller than it had been earlier. Sir, we had no way of knowing she was a veteran. She didn't mention it when she arrived. She shouldn't have had to mention it, Chen replied, his tone sharp. Your job is to verify credentials, not to make assumptions about who belongs on this base based on their appearance or their current employment. Maya felt something warm spreading through her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. It was the feeling of being defended by someone in authority, of having her worth recognized and validated by someone who understood what she'd given in service to her country. She'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen as something other than a problem to be solved or a burden to be managed. Chen turned back to Maya, his expression softening slightly. Staff Sergeant, I apologize for the treatment you've received here today. These guards should have handled your situation with more professionalism. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. The sudden shift from being treated as a potential criminal to being addressed by her military rank was overwhelming, and she felt emotions she'd kept buried for years, threatening to surface. Thank you, sir, she managed to say. Chen looked at the delivery bag in her hands. You still have food to deliver? Yes, sir. Captain Mitchell's office requested lunch for a staff meeting. I'll escort you personally, Chen said. We can't have a veteran being turned away from delivering food to our own personnel. As Chen gestured for Maya to follow him toward the base interior, she caught sight of the guards' faces. Morrison looked stricken, Blake appeared mortified, and Jake seemed to be trying to disappear into his uniform. The transformation from confident authority figures to embarrassed subordinates was complete, and Maya found herself feeling almost sorry for them. Almost. But as they walked away from the checkpoint, Maya realized that something fundamental had changed. For the first time in years, someone had seen past her current circumstances to recognize who she really was underneath. The delivery uniform and the beaten-down car and the worn sneakers hadn't mattered to Chen once he understood her true background. She was still Maya Rodriguez, veteran of 2 combat tours, expert in explosive ordnance disposal, someone who had earned respect through actions rather than appearance. The feeling was intoxicating, and Maya found herself walking a little straighter as she followed Chen toward the administrative building. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be treated as someone who mattered, someone whose presence was valued, rather than merely tolerated. The contrast with her treatment at the checkpoint was stark, and it reminded her of just how much she'd lost when she'd left military service behind. But it also reminded her that some things couldn't be taken away, no matter how much time passed or how far she'd fallen from her former position. Her training was still there, her knowledge was still valuable, and her service record was still something that commanded respect from people who understood what it meant. The guards at the checkpoint had seen only what she appeared to be in that moment, but Chen had seen who she really was underneath. As they reached the entrance to the administrative building, Chen stopped and turned to face her. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I want you to know that what happened back there was unacceptable. Veterans deserve better treatment from our personnel, regardless of their current circumstances." Maya nodded, still processing the dramatic shift in how she was being treated. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate you taking the time to verify my credentials." "It's more than that," Chen said quietly. "I know who you are, Staff Sergeant. I know what you did in Afghanistan. And I know that the woman who saved 37 lives in a single operation deserves a hell of a lot more respect than she received today." Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. She'd never spoken publicly about that mission, had never sought recognition for what she'd accomplished during those horrible hours when everything had gone wrong and she'd been the only thing standing between her unit and complete disaster. The fact that Chen knew about it, that he'd somehow connected her current identity to her military service record, was both shocking and deeply moving. "How do you know about that?" she asked softly. Chen smiled, the first genuine warmth she'd seen from him. "Because I was the intelligence officer who wrote the after-action report. I'd been wondering for years what happened to the engineer who saved my operation." The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. She stared at Chen, trying to reconcile the officer in front of her with the disembodied voice that had coordinated intelligence during that chaotic mission. She'd never seen his face, had only heard his voice through radio communications, but she remembered how calm he'd remained even when everything was falling apart around them. "You were the intelligence officer on Operation Desert Shield?" she asked, using the codename that had been classified for years. "I was," Chen confirmed. "And I've never forgotten what you did that day. When I saw your name on the delivery receipt, I had to make sure it was really you." Maya felt tears threatening to spill over, and she fought to maintain her composure. After years of being invisible, of being treated as just another face in the crowd, someone had not only remembered her service, but had specifically recognized her contribution to a mission that had saved dozens of lives. The validation was overwhelming, and she struggled to find words adequate to express what she was feeling. "I was just doing my job," she said finally, falling back on the military response that had been drilled into her during training. "You were doing a hell of a lot more than your job," Chen replied. "You were being a hero, whether you want to admit it or not." Part 3. World Building. The administrative building of Fort Braxton rose before them like a monument to military bureaucracy, its bland concrete facade broken only by narrow windows and the occasional flag hanging limply in the humid North Carolina air. Maya had passed similar buildings countless times during her own service, but walking into one as a civilian felt different, like stepping back into a world she'd left behind but never quite forgotten. The familiar smells hit her immediately: floor wax, coffee, and that indefinable scent of institutional efficiency that seemed to permeate every military facility she'd ever entered. Chen led her through the main entrance, past a reception desk where a young corporal looked up with curious eyes before quickly returning to his paperwork. The hallways stretched in both directions, lined with office doors marked only by room numbers and the occasional nameplate. Maya could hear the muted sounds of military life carrying through the walls: phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the occasional burst of laughter from someone's office. It was a symphony of normalcy that felt both comforting and alien after years of civilian employment. "Captain Mitchell's office is on the second floor," Chen explained as they approached a bank of elevators. "She's been running logistics for the base commissary renovation project. Apparently, they're working through lunch today to finalize the contractor proposals." Maya nodded, adjusting her grip on the delivery bag. The food inside had probably cooled considerably during the confrontation at the checkpoint, and she hoped it would still be acceptable when she finally delivered it. She'd built her reputation with Hometown Eats on reliability and quality, and the idea of delivering substandard food to military personnel bothered her more than she cared to admit. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and they stepped inside together. Maya caught her reflection in the polished metal doors and was struck by how out of place she looked in her civilian delivery uniform. Standing next to Chen in his crisp military fatigues, she felt like an imposter, someone playing dress-up in a world where she no longer belonged. The contrast was stark and unsettling, a visual reminder of how far she'd fallen from her former life. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Chen said as the elevator climbed, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but what brought you to civilian life? Your service record shows you were on track for promotion to Sergeant First Class." Maya felt her chest tighten. It was a question she'd been avoiding for years, one that required explanations she wasn't sure she was ready to give. The simple answer was that she'd been medically discharged after sustaining injuries in an IED explosion, but the complex answer involved months of physical therapy, psychological evaluation, and the gradual realization that she might never be fit for combat duty again. "Medical discharge," she said finally. "I was injured in an explosion during my second tour. The Army decided I wasn't suitable for continued service." Chen nodded understandingly. "I'm sorry to hear that. The transition to civilian life can be challenging, especially for soldiers who loved what they did." "It's been an adjustment," Maya admitted, which was perhaps the understatement of the decade. The transition from being a highly trained combat engineer to delivering food for minimum wage plus tips had been one of the most difficult experiences of her life, made worse by the fact that few people seemed to understand or care about what she'd sacrificed in service to her country. The elevator stopped at the second floor, and they stepped out into another institutional hallway. This one was slightly more personalized, with bulletin boards displaying unit information and motivational posters encouraging excellence in all military endeavors. Maya recognized the aesthetic immediately, the careful balance between military efficiency and human touches that characterized administrative areas in every base she'd ever visited. Chen led her down the hall to a door marked Captain S. Mitchell, Logistics Coordinator. Through the frosted glass, Maya could see the shadows of several people moving around inside, and she heard the muffled sounds of conversation and paper shuffling. Chen knocked twice before opening the door. "Captain Mitchell? Your lunch delivery has arrived." The office was larger than Maya had expected, with a conference table surrounded by chairs where 3 people sat with laptops open and documents spread across the surface. Captain Sarah Mitchell was a woman in her late 30s, with short brown hair and intelligent eyes that immediately focused on Maya with professional interest. She was flanked by 2 other officers, both men who looked up from their work with expressions of polite curiosity. "Excellent timing," Mitchell said, standing and approaching Maya with a smile. "We were just starting to discuss whether we should break for lunch or push through to finish the proposals." Maya set the delivery bag on a nearby table and began unpacking the contents. 3 club sandwiches, 2 Caesar salads and a large sweet tea, she announced, arranging the containers according to the order receipt. I apologize if the food has cooled down a bit. There was a delay at the checkpoint. Mitchell raised an eyebrow. Delay at the checkpoint? What kind of delay? Chen stepped forward slightly. The guards had some difficulty verifying the delivery authorization. We got it sorted out, but it took longer than it should have. Maya caught the diplomatic understatement and appreciated Chen's discretion. She didn't need Captain Mitchell to know that she'd nearly been escorted off the base by security because 3 guards had decided she didn't look like she belonged there. The professional courtesy was refreshing after the hostility she'd encountered at the gate. Well, I'm glad you persevered, Mitchell said, examining the food with obvious satisfaction. These staff meetings always run long, and trying to discuss complex logistics on empty stomachs never works well. One of the other officers, a lieutenant colonel with graying temples, looked up from his laptop. Ma'am, are you the delivery driver who had the situation at the main gate? We got a call about it from security. Maya felt her stomach drop. If word of the confrontation was already spreading through the base, it could cause problems for her employer and potentially affect her ability to make future deliveries. She'd learned that military bases were like small towns when it came to gossip, and negative stories had a way of taking on a life of their own. Yes, sir, she replied carefully. There was some confusion about the authorization, but Major Chen helped resolve it. The lieutenant colonel nodded. Good. We can't have our food delivery people being hassled by over-enthusiastic security. The commissary renovation has us relying on outside catering more than usual, and we need those relationships to work smoothly. Mitchell was setting up the food on the conference table when she paused and looked back at Maya. I don't suppose you'd be interested in sticking around for a few minutes. We're discussing the layout for the new commissary kitchen, and I'd love to get a civilian perspective on efficiency and workflow. Maya felt a surge of surprise. It had been years since anyone had asked for her professional opinion about anything, and the idea that a military officer would value her input on a logistics project was both flattering and intimidating. She glanced at Chen, who gave her an encouraging nod. I'd be happy to help if I can, Maya said, though I should mention that I'm not really a food service expert. I just deliver it. That's exactly why your perspective would be valuable, Mitchell replied. You see these operations from the outside, which means you might notice inefficiencies that we've become blind to. Maya found herself being drawn into the conversation as Mitchell explained the renovation project. The base commissary was being expanded and modernized, with new equipment and improved workflow designs intended to serve the growing population of Fort Braxton. The challenge was balancing efficiency with cost-effectiveness, while maintaining the quality standards that military personnel expected. As Maya listened to the discussion, she found herself thinking not just about food delivery logistics, but about the broader challenges of military infrastructure. She'd spent years working on construction and renovation projects in combat zones, where efficiency wasn't just about convenience, but about survival. The skills she'd developed as a combat engineer were surprisingly relevant to civilian construction projects, though few people seemed to recognize the connection. The main bottleneck we're dealing with is the loading dock, Mitchell was explaining, pointing to architectural drawings spread across the table. We have multiple suppliers trying to deliver during the same time windows, and the current design doesn't provide adequate staging area for large shipments. Maya studied the drawings, her engineering training automatically analyzing the traffic flow and spatial relationships. She could see several potential improvements, but she hesitated to speak up. These were experienced officers working on a complex project, and she was just a delivery driver who'd stumbled into the conversation. What do you think? Mitchell asked, noticing Maya's intense focus on the drawings. Well, Maya said carefully, I've made deliveries to a lot of different facilities, and the ones that work best usually have separate entry points for different types of deliveries. If you're dealing with large food shipments, maintenance supplies, and smaller deliveries like mine, they all have different requirements. The lieutenant colonel leaned forward with interest. What kind of different requirements? Maya felt her confidence growing as she recognized that her experience actually was relevant to the discussion. Large shipments need staging areas and equipment for handling pallets. Maintenance supplies often require direct access to storage areas. Small deliveries like restaurant orders need quick turnaround without interfering with larger operations. She pointed to a section of the drawings where the loading dock connected to the main kitchen area. If you separated these functions, you could probably reduce congestion and improve security at the same time. Large shipments could use the main dock, while smaller deliveries could use a separate entrance with direct access to the kitchen. Mitchell and the lieutenant colonel exchanged glances, and Maya could see them considering her suggestion seriously. It was a heady feeling, being treated as someone whose opinion mattered, whose experience was valuable rather than merely tolerated. "That's actually a really good point," Mitchell said. "We hadn't considered the security implications of mixing different types of deliveries." Chen, who had been quietly observing the conversation, stepped forward. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez has extensive experience with infrastructure design and logistics. She might have insights that could benefit the entire project." Maya felt her cheeks warm at the praise, but she also felt a familiar surge of anxiety. She'd been out of the military for years, and while her training was still solid, she wasn't sure she was ready to be seen as an expert on anything beyond delivering food. The gap between her current life and her former expertise felt vast and intimidating. "I appreciate the vote of confidence," she said, "but I should probably get back to work. I have other deliveries to make this afternoon." Mitchell nodded understandingly. "Of course. But would you be interested in coming back sometime to discuss this further? We could use a fresh perspective on the project, and your background in engineering could be really valuable." Maya felt her heart racing. The offer was tempting beyond words, a chance to use her skills and knowledge in a meaningful way, after years of feeling like her expertise was going to waste. But it also felt dangerous, like opening a door to a world she'd been forced to leave behind and might not be able to navigate successfully. "I'd be interested," she said finally. "You can reach me through the catering company if you decide you want to follow up." As Maya prepared to leave, she caught Chen watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was approval there, and perhaps a hint of concern, as if he understood the complexity of what she was feeling. The conversation had reminded her of who she used to be, but it had also highlighted the distance between her past and present selves. The walk back to the elevator was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Maya felt like something had shifted during the brief meeting, not just in how others perceived her, but in how she perceived herself. For a few minutes, she'd been treated as someone with valuable knowledge and experience, someone whose opinion mattered. It was a feeling she'd almost forgotten, and she wasn't sure whether to be grateful for the reminder or resentful of its brevity. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Chen said as they waited for the elevator, "I want you to know that what happened back there wasn't charity. Captain Mitchell genuinely values your input, and your suggestions about the loading dock were spot on." Maya nodded, still processing the interaction. It felt good to be useful again. "You're useful every day," Chen replied. "Delivering food to people who need it is important work, but I understand what you mean about using your other skills." The elevator arrived, and they stepped inside together. Maya watched the floor numbers decrease as they descended, feeling like she was leaving something important behind. The conversation with Mitchell had awakened parts of herself that she'd thought were permanently dormant, and she wasn't sure how to integrate that awakening with her current reality. As they reached the ground floor, Chen turned to her one more time. "Staff Sergeant, I hope you'll consider taking Captain Mitchell up on her offer. The military needs people like you, whether you're in uniform or not." Maya smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the North Carolina heat. "Thank you, sir, for everything." As she walked back toward the main gate, Maya realized that her relationship with Fort Braxton had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just a delivery driver trying to access a military facility. She was a veteran with valuable skills and experience who had been recognized and appreciated by her peers. The transformation felt profound and slightly overwhelming, like stepping into a version of herself that she'd thought was lost forever. The guards at the checkpoint avoided eye contact as she passed, their earlier confidence replaced by obvious embarrassment. Maya didn't gloat or make any comments about their behavior, but she did walk a little straighter as she headed back to her car. She had deliveries to make and a job to complete, but she also had something she hadn't possessed in years: the knowledge that she was more than just her current circumstances, and that the right people could still see who she really was underneath. Part 4. Escalating conflict. Maya's next delivery was to a law firm downtown, a routine drop-off that normally would have taken her mind off the morning's events. But as she drove through the streets of Fayetteville, she found herself unable to stop thinking about the confrontation at Fort Braxton, the way the guards had looked at her, the assumptions they'd made, the casual cruelty in their dismissal of her credentials. It all felt like a microcosm of every frustrating interaction she'd had since leaving the military. She pulled into the parking lot of Henderson & Associates and sat in her car for a moment, trying to shake off the lingering anger. The building was a sleek glass structure that spoke of success and prosperity, the kind of place where people wore expensive suits and discussed important matters behind closed doors. Maya looked down at her faded delivery uniform and felt the familiar pang of inadequacy that had become her constant companion over the past few years. The receptionist barely looked up when Maya entered with the lunch order, just pointed toward an elevator and mumbled something about the third floor. Maya rode up in silence, watching the floor numbers climb, and thinking about how different this felt from her earlier experience at the base. Here she was invisible again, just another service worker moving through spaces designed for more important people. The law firm's break room was empty when she arrived, which was typical for midday deliveries. Maya set up the food according to the order specifications, arranged the utensils and napkins, and left the receipt on the counter. As she packed up her empty delivery bag, she heard voices approaching from the main office area. "I don't understand why we can't just order from the usual place," a woman was saying. "This food looks cheap." "The usual place was booked," a man replied. "Besides, it's just lunch. It's not like we're trying to impress anyone." Maya felt her jaw tighten. She'd learned to tune out such comments over the years, but today they stung more than usual. After being treated with respect and recognition at Fort Braxton, the casual dismissal of her employer's food felt like a return to the reality she'd been trying to escape. "Well, next time let's plan better," the woman continued. "I don't want clients thinking we're cutting corners on everything." Maya finished packing and headed toward the elevator, but as she waited for the doors to open, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see a middle-aged woman in an expensive suit approaching with a frown on her face. "Excuse me," the woman said. "Are you the delivery person?" "Yes, ma'am," Maya replied, forcing a professional smile. "Is there something wrong with the order?" The woman gestured back toward the break room. "The sandwiches are cold, and the salad dressing is the wrong type. We specifically requested ranch, and this appears to be Italian." Maya pulled out her phone to check the order details. "According to my records, the order was for Italian dressing. But if there's been a mistake, I can contact the restaurant to see about getting it corrected." "It's not about contacting the restaurant," the woman said impatiently. "It's about getting the order right in the first place. This is exactly the kind of service issue that makes me hesitant to use local businesses." Maya felt her patience beginning to fray. After the morning's events, the last thing she needed was another confrontation with someone who seemed determined to find fault with her work. But she also knew that maintaining professionalism was crucial to keeping her job, regardless of how unreasonable the customer was being. "I understand your frustration," Maya said carefully. "The order was prepared according to the specifications I received, but if there's been a miscommunication, I'm happy to work with you to resolve it." The woman crossed her arms. "What I want is for service providers to take responsibility for their mistakes instead of making excuses. This is a professional environment, and we expect professional service." Maya stared at the woman, seeing something she recognized from her morning encounter with the guards at Fort Braxton. The same assumption of superiority, the same dismissive attitude toward service workers, the same casual cruelty dressed up as legitimate complaint. It was the kind of treatment she'd learned to expect from people who saw her uniform and immediately categorized her as less important than themselves. "Ma'am," Maya said, her voice remaining steady despite the anger building in her chest. "I delivered exactly what was ordered. If your office made a mistake when placing the order, that's not something I can fix retroactively, but I can offer to contact the restaurant and see if they're willing to send out a replacement at no charge." The woman's frown deepened. "Are you seriously arguing with me about this? I'm the customer here. I'm telling you there's a problem with the order, and your response is to tell me it's not your fault?" Maya felt something snap inside her. After years of swallowing her pride and accepting blame for things that weren't her fault, after a morning of being treated like a criminal for trying to do her job, she found herself unwilling to continue the pattern of automatic deference. "I'm not arguing with you," Maya said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm explaining what happened. You ordered Italian dressing, you received Italian dressing. If you wanted ranch dressing, you should have ordered ranch dressing. That's how ordering food works." The woman's eyes widened, clearly not expecting pushback from someone she'd categorize as a service worker. "Excuse me? Are you talking back to me?" Maya took a deep breath, realizing she'd crossed a line that could cost her job if this conversation escalated further. But something about the woman's shock at being challenged made it impossible for her to back down completely. After being recognized as someone with value and expertise just hours earlier, the return to being treated as subservient felt intolerable. "I'm providing you with accurate information about your order," Maya said calmly. "If you'd like to file a complaint with my employer, you're welcome to do that. But I've fulfilled my obligations as a delivery driver." The woman pulled out her phone. "What's the name of your company? I'm going to make sure your supervisor knows about your attitude." "Hometown Eats," Maya replied without hesitation. "Feel free to tell them that Maya Rodriguez delivered exactly what you ordered and explained the situation when you complained about it." The woman was already dialing as Maya stepped into the elevator. Through the closing doors, she could hear the beginning of what was undoubtedly going to be a scathing complaint about unprofessional service and insubordinate employees. Maya knew she should feel worried about the potential consequences, but instead she felt oddly liberated. For once, she hadn't automatically accepted blame for someone else's mistake or dissatisfaction. The ride down to the lobby gave her time to consider what had just happened. In the span of a few hours, she'd gone from being dismissed as a potential security threat to being recognized as a valuable expert to being criticized as an inadequate service provider. The whiplash was exhausting, but it also clarified something important. The problem wasn't with her performance or her worth as a person. The problem was with people who saw her uniform and immediately made assumptions about her intelligence, her competence, and her right to be treated with basic respect. Maya's phone rang as she reached her car. The caller ID showed her supervisor's number, and she felt her stomach drop. Word traveled fast in the service industry, and she knew the complaint from the law firm had probably already reached Hometown Eats headquarters. "Maya, this is Jennifer," her supervisor said without preamble. "I just got a call from Henderson and Associates. They're saying you were rude to a client and refused to take responsibility for a mistake in their order." Maya leaned against her car, suddenly feeling very tired. The order was correct according to the specifications they provided. The client wanted to blame me for their own ordering error, and I explained that I couldn't fix a problem that didn't exist. "Maya, you know how this works. The customer is always right, even when they're wrong. You apologize, you offer to make it right, and you move on. You don't argue with clients about who's responsible for what. So I'm supposed to accept blame for things I didn't do wrong." Jennifer sighed. "You're supposed to provide excellent customer service, which sometimes means eating a little crow to keep clients happy. These law firms are big accounts for us. We can't afford to lose them because a driver got defensive about a salad dressing." Maya felt the weight of economic reality settling around her like a straitjacket. She needed this job, needed the income, however modest it might be, needed the health insurance and the structure it provided. Getting fired for standing up to an unreasonable customer would be a luxury she couldn't afford, regardless of how justified her position might be. "I understand," Maya said finally. "It won't happen again." "Good. Look, I know customers can be difficult sometimes, but you've got to keep your cool. Your performance reviews have been solid, and I don't want to see you mess that up over something like this." After Jennifer hung up, Maya sat in her car for several minutes, trying to process the conversation. The message was clear. Her worth as an employee was measured entirely by her willingness to absorb abuse from customers without complaint. It didn't matter if she was right, it didn't matter if the customer was unreasonable, and it certainly didn't matter that she was a trained professional with years of experience in complex problem solving. All that mattered was her ability to smile and apologize when people treated her badly. The contrast with her experience at Fort Braxton couldn't have been starker. There, her knowledge and expertise had been valued, her service record had been respected, and her dignity had been protected by someone with the authority to do so. In the civilian world, she was expected to be grateful for any employment at all, and to accept whatever treatment customers felt like dishing out. Maya started her car and pulled back into traffic, heading toward her next delivery. The afternoon sun was brutal, turning her non-air-conditioned vehicle into a mobile oven, and she could feel sweat beginning to soak through her uniform shirt. She had 3 more stops to make before her shift ended, and she needed to complete them without any further incidents if she wanted to keep her job. The next delivery was to a medical office complex, a sprawling building filled with specialists and administrative staff. Maya had been here before, and she knew the routine: park in the visitor lot, navigate the confusing layout to find the right suite, deliver the food to whoever was designated to receive it, and get out as quickly as possible. Medical offices were usually straightforward customers, focused more on efficiency than on finding fault with service providers. She found the ordering office on the 2nd floor and was greeted by a receptionist who actually smiled when she saw the delivery bag. "Perfect timing," the woman said. "The doctors are between patients, so they can actually eat while the food's still hot." Maya unpacked the order efficiently, checking each item against the receipt and arranging everything on the break room counter. The receptionist watched approvingly, commenting on how organized and professional Maya's setup was. It was a small kindness, but after the morning's conflicts, Maya found herself disproportionately grateful for basic courtesy. "Thank you so much," the receptionist said as Maya prepared to leave. "The doctors really appreciate having reliable delivery service. It makes such a difference when you're dealing with packed schedules." Maya nodded, feeling some of her earlier tension beginning to ease. "Happy to help. Have a good afternoon." As she walked back to the elevator, Maya reflected on the interaction. The receptionist had treated her as a professional, providing a valuable service, not as a servant or a potential problem. It was such a basic level of respect that Maya realized how rare it had become in her daily experience. Most customers saw her as either invisible or inadequate, with very little middle ground. The elevator doors opened to reveal a man in scrubs who looked up from his phone when Maya entered. He glanced at her delivery bag and smiled. "Another satisfied customer?" "I hope so," Maya replied. Dr. Patterson's office ordered lunch for their staff meeting. "That's my office," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm Dr. Patterson. Thank you for getting that here so quickly. These scheduling meetings always run long, and we never remember to plan for food until everyone's starving." Maya shook his hand, surprised by the introduction. In her experience, doctors rarely bothered to acknowledge delivery drivers personally, much less introduce themselves. "Maya Rodriguez, Hometown Eats. Thanks for choosing us for your catering needs." "Actually, I'm glad I ran into you," Dr. Patterson said as the elevator descended. "We're planning a larger event next month, a continuing education seminar for about 50 people. Would your company be able to handle something that size?" Maya felt a surge of professional pride. "Absolutely. We do catering for events up to 100 people. If you call the main office, they can work with you on menu planning and logistics." "Excellent. I'll mention that I spoke with you personally. You seem very professional, and that matters a lot when we're dealing with physician colleagues from other practices." The elevator reached the ground floor, and Dr. Patterson headed toward the parking garage while Maya walked toward the main entrance. His comment about her professionalism echoed in her mind as she made her way back to her car. Here was someone who had recognized her competence and treated her as a partner in providing quality service, rather than as a subordinate to be managed or criticized. The contrast between Dr. Patterson's approach and the law firm client's attitude was striking. Both were professionals in high-status careers. Both were customers using the same delivery service. But their treatment of Maya couldn't have been more different. One saw her as a valuable service provider, worthy of respect and potential future business, while the other saw her as a convenient target for displaced frustration. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message as she reached her car. It was from a number she didn't recognize, but the message made her pulse quicken. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, this is Major Chen. Captain Mitchell would like to schedule a meeting to discuss the commissary project. Are you available this week? Maya stared at the message, trying to process what it meant. After the morning's dramatic encounter at Fort Braxton, she'd assumed that any follow-up would be purely social, a polite gesture from officers who wanted to acknowledge her service record. The idea that they were seriously interested in her professional input on a construction project felt almost too good to be true. She typed back quickly, available evenings after 6 p.m. or weekends. Thank you for following up. The response came within minutes. Can you meet Thursday evening at 7 p.m.? Base Conference Room B12. We'll have preliminary architectural drawings to review. Maya's hands were shaking slightly as she typed her confirmation. The prospect of using her engineering knowledge professionally again, even in a consulting capacity, was both thrilling and terrifying. She'd been away from technical work for so long that she worried about whether her skills were still sharp enough to contribute meaningfully to a complex project. But beneath the anxiety was something else. Excitement. For the first time in years, someone was asking for her expertise, rather than just her ability to follow instructions and absorb criticism. The invitation represented a chance to be seen as Maya Rodriguez, the combat engineer, rather than Maya Rodriguez, the delivery driver, and that possibility felt like a lifeline she hadn't known she was drowning without. Her next delivery was to a corporate office park, another routine stop that normally wouldn't have registered as particularly memorable. But as Maya navigated the sterile hallways looking for the right suite number, she found herself thinking about the different ways people chose to see her. Some, like the guards at Fort Braxton and the lawyer at Henderson & Associates, saw only her current circumstances and made immediate judgments about her worth and capabilities. Others, like Major Chen and Dr. Patterson, looked beyond the surface to recognize her as a complete person with a history and expertise that extended far beyond her delivery uniform. The realization was both liberating and frustrating. Maya had spent years accepting other people's limited perceptions of her as somehow accurate or deserved, but the morning's events had shown her that those perceptions said more about the observers than about her actual value as a person. She was still the same woman who had diffused explosive devices under enemy fire, who had saved lives through technical expertise and courage under pressure, who had earned the respect of fellow soldiers through competence and dedication. The delivery at the corporate office went smoothly, with administrative staff who were polite but unremarkable in their interactions. Maya completed the transaction efficiently and headed back to her car, her mind already moving ahead to her final stop of the day. She had one more delivery to make, and then she could go home and start preparing for her meeting with Captain Mitchell. As she drove through the late afternoon traffic, Maya found herself thinking about what she might contribute to the commissary renovation project. Her experience with military infrastructure was extensive, covering everything from temporary field installations to permanent base improvements. She'd worked on projects that required balancing security concerns with operational efficiency, managing complex logistics in challenging environments, and solving technical problems under pressure. The skills were still there, even if they'd been dormant for years. Engineering principles didn't change just because she'd been out of practice, and her understanding of military operations was probably more current than that of many civilian contractors who worked on base projects. The question was whether she could translate that knowledge into useful recommendations for a modern commissary renovation, Maya's final delivery was to a small insurance office, the kind of family-owned business that formed the backbone of local economies across the country. The owner, a woman in her 60s named Mrs. Chen, greeted Maya personally and insisted on checking each item in the order to make sure everything was correct. "This looks perfect," Mrs. Chen said, examining the sandwiches and sides that Maya had arranged on the office break room table. "My staff really appreciates having good food delivered when we're working late on claims processing." "Thank you for your business," Maya replied. "We appreciate customers who understand that meal delivery is about more than just convenience." Mrs. Chen looked at Maya curiously. "You sound like someone who takes pride in your work. That's not always easy in service jobs." Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest. The comment was kind, but it also highlighted the assumptions that surrounded her current employment. People seemed surprised when service workers demonstrated competence and professionalism, as if those qualities were unexpected in jobs that didn't require advanced degrees or specialized training. "Every job is important if you're doing it right," Maya said carefully. "I try to treat my customers' needs seriously, regardless of what I'm delivering." Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. "That's a good attitude. Too many people these days act like service work is beneath them. But I've always believed that any honest work is worthy of respect." As Maya packed up her empty delivery bag, she reflected on Mrs. Chen's words. The sentiment was well-intentioned, but it also revealed the complex attitudes that surrounded manual labor and service employment. People paid lip service to the dignity of all work, while simultaneously treating service workers as if their jobs were somehow less valuable than professional careers. The truth was more complicated. Maya's current job was honest work that provided a necessary service, but it was also a dramatic underutilization of her skills and training. She'd gone from being responsible for life-and-death decisions in combat zones to worrying about whether sandwiches were delivered at the correct temperature. The work itself wasn't beneath her, but the waste of her capabilities felt like a betrayal of everything she'd sacrificed to develop those capabilities in the first place. But the meeting with Captain Mitchell represented a chance to bridge that gap, to find a way to use her engineering knowledge in service of military personnel without requiring her to abandon her current employment entirely. It was a compromise that could allow her to feel useful again, while maintaining the financial stability she desperately needed. Maya finished her shift and drove home to her small apartment, her mind buzzing with possibilities. Thursday evening suddenly felt both too far away and too soon, giving her time to prepare but also time to worry about whether she was setting herself up for disappointment. The military had a way of offering opportunities that seemed promising but ultimately led nowhere, and she wasn't sure she could handle another door slamming shut just as it seemed to be opening. But as she parked in front of her building and gathered her delivery bag for the last time that day, Maya realized something important had changed. For the first time in years, she was looking forward to something beyond just getting through another day. The prospect of being useful again, of contributing her knowledge to something meaningful, had awakened parts of herself that she'd thought were permanently lost. Whether the meeting led to concrete opportunities or just remained a brief moment of recognition, Maya knew that she'd been reminded of who she really was underneath the delivery uniform. That knowledge alone was worth the risk of disappointment, because it meant she could stop accepting other people's limited perceptions of her worth and start remembering her own. Part 4. Escalating conflict Thursday evening arrived with the kind of oppressive humidity that made North Carolina's summers legendary for their misery. Maya had spent the intervening days researching commissary design principles and reviewing her old engineering notebooks, trying to refresh her memory of construction logistics and infrastructure planning. She'd even driven past Fort Braxton twice during her delivery routes, studying the existing layout and imagining how the renovation might integrate with the current facilities. As she approached the main gate for her appointment, Maya felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The guards on duty were different from the ones she'd encountered earlier in the week, which was probably fortunate given how that interaction had played out. These guards processed her visitor credentials efficiently and professionally, providing a gate pass and directions to the conference room, without any unnecessary commentary about her appearance or her right to be there. Conference room B12 was located in the same administrative building where she'd delivered food to Captain Mitchell, but accessing it in the evening felt different from her daytime delivery. The hallways were quieter, with only essential personnel moving through the corridors, and Maya's footsteps seemed to echo more loudly on the polished floors. She found herself walking more carefully, conscious of her civilian clothes and her guest status in a space designed for military operations. Major Chen was waiting outside the conference room when Maya arrived, and his smile of recognition helped ease some of her nervousness. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, thank you for coming. Captain Mitchell is already inside with the architectural plans." Maya followed Chen into the conference room, which was larger and more formal than Mitchell's office. A long table dominated the space, surrounded by ergonomic chairs, and equipped with projection screens and communication equipment. Architectural drawings were spread across the table's surface, held down by paperweights and coffee mugs, creating a workspace that looked both professional and practical. Captain Mitchell looked up from the drawings as they entered, and Maya was struck again by the officer's direct, intelligent gaze. "Maya, I'm glad you could make it. We've been looking forward to getting your perspective on this project." Maya took the offered seat across from Mitchell, noting how strange it felt to be addressed by her first name by a military officer. The informality was clearly intentional, designed to make her feel more like a colleague than a subordinate, but it also highlighted the ambiguous nature of her current status. She wasn't military personnel, but she wasn't exactly a civilian contractor either. "Thank you for inviting me," Maya said. "I've been looking forward to seeing the plans in detail." Mitchell gestured toward the drawings spread across the table. "What you're looking at is the preliminary design for the commissary expansion. We're adding about 3,000 square feet of kitchen and storage space, plus a complete renovation of the existing facilities. The challenge is integrating the new construction with current operations while maintaining security protocols and minimizing disruption to base activities." Maya studied the drawings, her engineering training automatically analyzing the spatial relationships and traffic flow patterns. The design was competent but conventional, following standard military construction guidelines without much innovation or adaptation to the specific challenges of the site. She could see several potential improvements, but she also recognized the delicate position she was in as an unofficial consultant, offering criticism of work done by qualified professionals. "The basic layout looks solid," Maya said carefully. "The expansion integrates well with the existing structure, and the traffic flow through the kitchen areas follows logical patterns." Chen leaned forward slightly. "We're particularly interested in your thoughts about the loading dock modifications. That was the area you commented on during your delivery earlier this week." Maya turned her attention to the loading dock section of the drawings, where she could see that the designers had attempted to address some of the congestion issues she'd mentioned. The solution involved expanding the existing dock and adding a secondary entrance for smaller deliveries, which was a step in the right direction but didn't fully address the security and efficiency concerns she'd identified. "The expanded dock space will definitely help with staging large shipments," Maya said, "but I'm not sure the secondary entrance is positioned optimally. If you're trying to separate different types of deliveries, you want to create distinct pathways that don't intersect until after security screening." Mitchell made notes as Maya spoke, clearly taking her comments seriously. "What would you recommend for positioning?" Maya traced the drawings with her finger, outlining an alternative approach that would create separate security checkpoints for different types of deliveries, while maintaining efficient access to the kitchen and storage areas. As she explained her reasoning, she felt her confidence growing. The technical knowledge was still there, still sharp, still relevant to the problems they were trying to solve. "The key is thinking about security as a process, rather than just a checkpoint," Maya explained. "You want to create layers of verification that don't impede legitimate operations but make it harder for unauthorized materials or personnel to access sensitive areas." Chen and Mitchell exchanged glances, and Maya could see them processing her suggestions with obvious interest. It was gratifying to be taken seriously, to have her expertise valued rather than dismissed, but it also made her realize how much she'd missed this kind of intellectual engagement over the past few years. "That's a really innovative approach," Mitchell said. "Have you worked on similar projects before?" Maya hesitated, unsure how much of her military experience to share. The specific details of her deployment work were often classified, but the general principles she'd learned were applicable to civilian construction projects. She decided to focus on the transferable skills rather than the classified applications. "I worked on infrastructure projects in Afghanistan," she said. "We had to balance security requirements with operational efficiency under challenging conditions. The principles are similar, even if the specific threats are different." Chen nodded understandingly. "Forward operating base construction. That's relevant experience for this kind of project." As the conversation continued, Maya found herself becoming more animated and engaged than she'd been in years. The technical challenges were complex but solvable, requiring the kind of creative problem-solving that had made her love engineering in the first place. Mitchell and Chen asked thoughtful questions and built on her suggestions, creating a collaborative dynamic that felt natural and productive. "What about the HVAC integration?" Mitchell asked, pointing to another section of the drawings. "We're dealing with some challenging requirements for air filtration and temperature control." Maya studied the mechanical system's layout, noting several potential inefficiencies in the ductwork routing and equipment placement. Her experience with military infrastructure had taught her to think about systems integration as well as individual components, considering how different building systems would interact under various operating conditions. "The current design looks like it's optimized for installation rather than performance," Maya observed. "If you reroute some of these ducts and relocate the primary air handling units, you could improve efficiency and reduce maintenance requirements." She sketched her suggestions on a notepad, creating rough diagrams that illustrated her proposed modifications. The drawings were crude but clear, showing how her recommendations would affect airflow patterns and equipment accessibility. Mitchell and Chen studied her sketches with obvious interest, asking follow-up questions about implementation costs and technical requirements. As Maya answered their questions, she realized that something fundamental had changed in how she saw herself. For the first time in years, she wasn't just Maya Rodriguez, the delivery driver who used to be an engineer. She was Maya Rodriguez, the engineer who happened to work in food delivery. The distinction might seem subtle, but it felt profound to her sense of identity and self-worth. "Maya, these suggestions are excellent," Mitchell said after reviewing the sketches. "You're identifying problems that our primary contractors missed, and your solutions are both practical and cost-effective." Maya felt a warm glow of professional satisfaction that she'd almost forgotten was possible. "Thank you. It feels good to use this kind of knowledge again." Chen looked at Mitchell, and Maya could see some kind of silent communication passing between them. After a moment, Mitchell turned back to Maya with an expression that suggested she was about to propose something significant. "Maya, I want to ask you something, and I want you to consider it seriously before answering. Would you be interested in serving as an unofficial technical consultant on this project? We can't offer you a formal contract through the usual procurement channels, but we could arrange for consultation fees that would compensate you for your time and expertise." Maya felt her heart race as she processed the offer. The prospect of using her engineering skills professionally again, even in a limited capacity, was almost too good to believe. But she also knew that accepting would require her to navigate complex questions about her current employment, her time availability, and her readiness to take on technical responsibilities after years away from the field. "That's a very generous offer," Maya said carefully. "Can I ask what level of involvement you're envisioning?" Mitchell outlined a role that would involve reviewing architectural plans, attending design meetings, and providing technical recommendations for infrastructure improvements. The time commitment would be manageable alongside her delivery work, primarily evening meetings and weekend site visits, but the intellectual engagement would be substantial. "We're dealing with some unique challenges because of the base's operational requirements," Mitchell explained. "Having someone with your background and fresh perspective could make a real difference in the project's success." Maya found herself torn between excitement and caution. The opportunity was exactly what she'd been hoping for without quite admitting it to herself, a chance to use her training and experience in service of something meaningful. But she also worried about whether she was qualified to take on such responsibility after years away from engineering work. "I'm interested," Maya said finally, "but I want to be honest about my limitations. I've been out of the engineering field for several years, and while my foundational knowledge is solid, I might not be current on the latest standards and practices." Chen waved off her concerns. "The fundamentals don't change, and your practical experience is more valuable than theoretical knowledge of the latest trends. Besides, you'll be working with qualified contractors who can handle the detailed implementation. We need someone who can think creatively about problems and identify solutions that others might miss." Maya felt a surge of confidence at Chen's words. The man had seen her work under pressure in Afghanistan, had witnessed her problem-solving abilities in life-and-death situations, and his endorsement carried weight that went beyond polite encouragement. "In that case, yes, I'd be very interested in consulting on the project." Mitchell smiled broadly. "Excellent. I'll work with our procurement office to set up a consultation agreement. It won't be a large amount of money, but it should provide fair compensation for your time and expertise." As they wrapped up the meeting and began organizing the architectural drawings, Maya felt like she was emerging from a long, difficult period of hibernation. The prospect of using her engineering knowledge again, of contributing to a project that would benefit military personnel, of being recognized for her expertise rather than just her service skills, felt like a return to herself after years of feeling lost and underutilized. Chen walked her back to the main entrance, and as they stepped outside into the humid evening air, he turned to her with a serious expression. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I want you to know that this opportunity isn't charity. You've earned this recognition through your service and your current contributions. Don't let anyone, including yourself, suggest otherwise." Maya nodded, feeling tears threaten to spill over. "Thank you, sir. This means more to me than you probably realize." "I think I have some idea," Chen replied. "The transition to civilian life is never easy, especially for soldiers who loved what they did. This project gives you a chance to bridge that gap, to use your military experience in service of current military personnel." As Maya drove home from Fort Braxton, she felt like the world had shifted slightly on its axis. Earlier in the week, she'd been a delivery driver, struggling to be treated with basic respect by security guards. Now she was a technical consultant being asked to contribute her expertise to a significant construction project. The transformation felt almost too dramatic to be real, but the consultation agreement that Mitchell had promised would make it official. But even as she celebrated this unexpected opportunity, Maya was aware that her fundamental situation hadn't changed. She was still a delivery driver working for Hometown Eats, still struggling to make ends meet on a modest income, still dealing with the daily indignities that came with service work. The consulting project would provide some additional income and intellectual satisfaction, but it wouldn't solve the broader challenges of her civilian transition. Still, for the first time in years, Maya felt like she had something to look forward to beyond just getting through another day. The project would give her a chance to prove to herself, as much as to others, that her engineering skills were still sharp and her military experience was still valuable. It was an opportunity to reclaim part of her identity that she'd thought was lost forever, and she intended to make the most of it. Part 5. Authority Challenge. Maya's world shifted into an unexpected rhythm over the following weeks. Her days remained anchored by food deliveries, navigating the familiar routes between restaurants and offices while dealing with the usual mix of courteous customers and unreasonable complaints. But her evenings had transformed into something she'd never thought possible again: serious technical work that engaged her engineering training and military experience. The consultation meetings at Fort Braxton quickly established their own routine. Maya would arrive at the base after completing her delivery routes, change into more professional attire in her car, and spend 2 to 3 hours reviewing architectural plans, discussing technical challenges, and proposing solutions to infrastructure problems. The work was intellectually demanding in ways she'd forgotten she missed, requiring her to synthesize knowledge from multiple disciplines while considering the unique constraints of military operations. Captain Mitchell had proven to be an ideal collaborator, someone who understood both the technical requirements of construction projects and the operational needs of military personnel. She listened carefully to Maya's suggestions, asked penetrating questions that forced Maya to think more deeply about her recommendations, and provided context about base operations that helped Maya tailor her solutions to specific needs. The key issue we're facing, Mitchell explained during one evening meeting, is that the commissary has to serve multiple functions simultaneously. It's not just a cafeteria, it's also an emergency food distribution center, a gathering place for social events, and a backup facility for field operations support. Your recommendations need to account for all of those uses. Maya studied the latest set of architectural drawings, considering how her proposed modifications would affect each of the functions Mitchell had outlined. The challenge was creating flexible spaces that could be rapidly reconfigured for different purposes, while maintaining the security and efficiency requirements of each use case. What if we incorporate modular elements into the design? Maya suggested. Portable partitions and reconfigurable serving areas that could transform the space based on current needs. It would require some additional infrastructure investment, but it would provide operational flexibility that fixed installations can't match. Mitchell made notes as Maya outlined her modular approach, occasionally asking clarifying questions about implementation costs and maintenance requirements. The collaborative dynamic felt natural and productive, a reminder of what Maya had loved about engineering work, the process of identifying complex problems and developing creative solutions through careful analysis and innovative thinking. But as Maya's involvement in the commissary project deepened, she began to encounter resistance from unexpected sources. The challenge came not from military personnel, who generally appreciated her contributions, but from civilian contractors who seemed threatened by her presence in technical discussions. The first sign of trouble appeared during a design review meeting that included representatives from Hartwell Construction, the primary contractor responsible for the commissary renovation. Maya had been invited to present her recommendations for the loading dock modifications, which would require significant changes to the contractor's original plans. David Hartwell, the company's project manager, was a man in his 50s who wore expensive suits and spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. He'd built his reputation on military construction projects and clearly took pride in his expertise with base infrastructure requirements. "I understand that Captain Mitchell has been consulting with civilian advisors," Hartwell said when Maya was introduced, "but I'm not sure why we need outside input on a project that my team has been planning for months." Mitchell's response was diplomatically firm. "Ms. Rodriguez has extensive experience with military infrastructure, and her suggestions have been consistently valuable. I thought it would be helpful for her to present her recommendations directly to the implementation team." Hartwell nodded politely, but Maya could see skepticism in his eyes as he looked her over. She was wearing her most professional outfit, a navy blazer and slacks that she'd bought years earlier for job interviews, but she was still clearly not part of the construction industry establishment that Hartwell represented. Maya began her presentation by outlining the security and efficiency challenges she'd identified with the current loading dock design. She explained her proposed modifications using the architectural drawings as visual aids, walking through each element of her recommendations and explaining the operational benefits they would provide. "The key insight," Maya said, "is that different types of deliveries have different security requirements. If we create separate processing pathways, we can maintain appropriate security levels while reducing congestion and improving efficiency." Hartwell listened without interruption, but his body language suggested growing irritation rather than interest. When Maya finished her presentation, he cleared his throat and leaned forward with the expression of someone preparing to deliver a definitive judgment. "Ms. Rodriguez, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I think you're overcomplicating a straightforward construction project. We've been building commissaries for military bases for over 20 years, and we know what works. These modifications you're proposing would add significant cost and complexity without providing proportional benefits. Maya felt her pulse quicken, recognizing the dismissive tone she'd encountered so many times in her civilian life. But this time, she was prepared with detailed technical analysis rather than just professional courtesy. Mr. Hartwell, I understand your concerns about cost and complexity, but I think the operational benefits justify the investment. The current design creates bottlenecks that will impact efficiency from day one of operations. Hartwell's expression hardened slightly. Ms. Rodriguez, with respect, you're making assumptions about operational requirements that may not reflect actual usage patterns. We base our designs on extensive experience with similar facilities. And I base my recommendations on extensive experience with military operations, Maya replied, feeling her military training assert itself. I've worked on forward operating bases where inefficient logistics meant the difference between successful missions and failed ones. The room fell silent, and Maya could feel the tension ratcheting up between her civilian consultant status and Hartwell's established contractor authority. Mitchell looked uncomfortable, clearly recognizing that the technical discussion had become a challenge to professional credibility. Hartwell recovered his composure quickly, but Maya could see calculation in his eyes as he reassessed her qualifications. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm sure your military experience was valuable, but civilian construction projects operate under different constraints. We have to consider factors like building codes, procurement regulations, and long-term maintenance costs that may not have been relevant to your previous work. Maya felt herself bristling at the implication that her engineering background was somehow insufficient for civilian projects. The condescension was subtle but unmistakable, wrapped in professional language but clearly designed to establish Hartwell's superior expertise. Mr. Hartwell, I'm a trained combat engineer with extensive experience in infrastructure development and logistics optimization. The principles I'm applying to this project are fundamental engineering concepts, not military-specific techniques. Combat engineer, Hartwell repeated, and Maya could hear a note of dismissal in his voice. That's impressive, but we're not building a forward operating base here. We're constructing a permanent facility that needs to meet civilian construction standards and serve a long-term operational mission. Maya felt her temper flare, but she forced herself to remain professional. Sir, with respect, combat engineering requires more sophisticated technical knowledge than civilian construction, not less. We had to design and build infrastructure under active fire, with limited resources, in environments where failure meant people died. I think I can handle a commissary renovation. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Maya immediately realized she'd crossed a line from technical disagreement into personal confrontation. Hartwell's face flushed, and she could see that her response had struck a nerve about his own professional qualifications. Ms. Rodriguez, Hartwell said carefully, I don't think military experience necessarily translates to civilian construction expertise. The regulatory environment is completely different. The quality standards are more stringent, and the long-term performance requirements are much more demanding. Maya stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. The man was seriously suggesting that civilian construction was more technically demanding than military engineering in combat zones. The level of ignorance and arrogance required to make such a statement was breathtaking. Mr. Hartwell, are you seriously suggesting that building a commissary on a secure military base is more technically challenging than constructing infrastructure under enemy fire in Afghanistan? Mitchell intervened before Hartwell could respond, clearly recognizing that the conversation was spiraling toward open conflict. I think we should focus on the technical merits of the proposals, rather than comparing different types of experience. Both perspectives are valuable, and we need to find ways to integrate them effectively. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.